Okay, so this is a third attempt at this video. The first time my SD card was full, and then the second time I put the wrong card in from another camera and it wanted to format that card. So third attempt, lucky, and hopefully this time it works. So part of what I've been doing in Berlin is not only my own personal research, but I've also been spending some time working with colleagues, with friends, and I had an opportunity to visit 3 of our doctoral students who were at Leipzig. In fact, one of them is at Bode University just this last week. Magnus and Angelique Havenga. Magnus has just handed in his doctoral dissertation to be examined, and Angelique is finishing up next year. And Calvin Ulrich, who completed his dissertation as well. Both of them, Calvin and Magnus, if I'm a little bit cold, my jaw is absolutely frozen. But Calvin and Magnus will defend their dissertations, their doctoral research in January, February of next year. Now that's quite a daunting thing to do. I've had the privilege twice now of defending doctorates. My first PhD in 2005 in South Africa, and then in 2017 in the Netherlands at Bode University. And the purpose of the doctoral defense, the reason why one defends a dissertation or a thesis, as it's called in some contexts, is to be able to show the examiners that you have conducted credible research and made a novel contribution to an area, a field of academic scholarship. Now, that's what the degree of doctor is awarded for making a new contribution, for being able to offer something new that advances research, that takes thinking in a particular area forward. And the thesis or the dissertation is often the record of that research journey. It tells of how you executed your research, what your findings were, whether your method was applied carefully and meticulously, whether the data that you've provided or the information that you've sourced was dealt with in a credible manner, and whether you have the skill to be able to present it in a manner which is convincing and substantive for experts in your field. Now, the examination itself differs from context to context. For example, in the Netherlands, at Radboud University, the defense was public. So members of the public could come. A committee was established, which consisted, in my case, of 5 examiners from across the world who read the thesis, the dissertation beforehand. That was known as the Leeskomitee, the reading committee. They then commented on it. You had an opportunity to make some corrections, typographical corrections, to develop your argument if they found that there were any areas that needed development. And then the defense itself was more of a sort of a public event where you spoke about it. They questioned you. They're known as opponents, opponenta, who come to oppose your ideas and see whether you can present them in a way which is credible. In fact, if you go onto my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Dion Forster, you'll see that there's a copy there of my doctoral defense, and you'll see how that was handled. In South Africa, it's slightly different, and certainly at the University of Stellenbosch, the defense is slightly different. It's a closed committee where the professors of the faculty are all invited. 3 readers are selected, 3 examiners, normally 2 externals, international externals, and then 1 internal examiner, and they prepare a report after having carefully read the dissertation. They prepare a report and some questions which then get posed to the candidate. And based on their reports and the examination itself, it's then decided whether the candidate passes the examination and will be awarded the degree of doctor. Now, here are a couple of tips that I'd like to give you for your PhD defense. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that probably by the time you defend your work, you are the subject matter expert in that field. There may be people who are more experienced, who have a more developed understanding of the broader field, or have expertise which is related to yours, but you are the subject matter expert in your field. And so go into the doctoral defense with the knowledge that you're able to present a good account of the specific, narrow, focused area of research in which you've worked. Now, you will be engaged with some tough or difficult questions, and very often those questions are tough or difficult because the persons who are asking them have experience or expertise which is related to yours but not the same. So they're coming at your topic from a different angle. So I often found with my own students when they're examined, and even in my own examinations, that the kinds of questions that people might ask might be questions either of a methodological nature or questions of analysis and interpretation. So they might, for example, say, in chapter 6 of your dissertation, you dealt with this particular idea in this way. Could it not be dealt with differently if one considers this approach or this author? Now, of course, the answers to those kinds of questions are important because they show that your work is embedded in a broader field of scholarship. However, what is important to remember is that you don't have to account for every single approach or every single piece of knowledge in a very, very wide field. As long as you can show that what you have done, what you proposed in your project, was done with care, it was done meticulously, it was done rigorously, and that the contribution that you are making is reasonable, that the outcomes that you're showing, that the findings that you have from your doctoral research are reasonable, then you've answered the question. So I often say to my students, if a question like that comes, say, that's a very important question, it's interesting, it's certainly something that I'd like to consider in future research. But because my project had to be focused, because it had to be limited, I made the following choices. And these choices were implemented in this way and brought me to do that particular thing which you see recorded in my dissertation or thesis on this page or in this way. Okay, a second thing is that sometimes examiners will ask questions or raise issues that actually are valid, things that should be addressed or that one should consider. And there are two places in which you can do that. You can either address them before the research is completed. So, for example, at Stellenbosch University, once a student has been examined, they often get the opportunity to make some corrections to their thesis or dissertation. So make sure that you have someone either who's going to keep notes for you, or if you're allowed to make notes yourself, make note of those things. Try to remember them as best you can and implement them in the most careful manner. Your doctoral dissertation is not the most important thing that you will do, but it is a very, very important piece of work that serves as a sort of milestone for the rest of your academic career. People will often come back and read that piece of work, and if there is a weakness, if there is a gap, if there is some flaw, be willing to hear it and be willing to address it so that you can make your work better, that you can offer the best possible work that you can to represent your research within the field. If, however, there is something which is problematic, which isn't necessary for your particular argument, it's quite within your rights to say that's an area that's important, it's something that I want to pay attention to, but I will have to do that in further research, perhaps in postdoctoral work. I'm just swapping hands. My hand is getting absolutely freezing here. I don't want to get frostbite, it's -9 today. So it's quite within your rights to be able to say that's something important, I will consider it or I'll take it into account, but I'll need to address that in further research. Remember, your research doesn't end when your PhD is complete. Hopefully that kicks off a career in research. Hopefully you can move from there into postdoctoral research. You might even, as for example what happens in the Netherlands, be expected that your dissertation is published as a book as part of the doctoral process. And it might be that you work those kinds of things into that second edition. What becomes published as your book. It could even be developed in scholarly articles. I found with my own work that at times when people have raised things which I've thought, that's a credible argument, it's valid, it's something I need to consider, I've entered into conversation with my own work from their perspective and said, well, these were the ideas that I initially held, but I've had to aggregate them in a different way. Okay, perhaps the third and final thing that I'd like to say is it's important to remember very often that the academy, unfortunately, is filled with egos. The people who work in academic fields, they themselves have often been bruised or hurt by the kinds of critiques or comments or attacks that they've had from other scholars. And so that does tend to breed a particular kind of critical engagement with academic work. And I would encourage you, go into your doctoral examination knowing that it might be a bit of a robust engagement. Understand that as you do your defense, there might be times or things which people say that you might find perhaps offensive, or maybe even a little bit not representing yourself or your work in the best possible way, perhaps that you've been misunderstood, and go in there knowing that's okay. I mean, that you're dealing with people who themselves are fallible, and that those spaces are quite charged. Try to treat every question and every person in your examination with tremendous respect. Very often these persons who are engaging you have spent years and years and years reading within your subject field. They have a particular kind of nuanced knowledge, perhaps a survey of the literature and the discourses and debates in your field that you might still develop over the next decades. And so treat them with that measure of respect and appreciation, but don't be afraid to defend your ideas. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's likely that by the time you hand in your dissertation, you are the subject matter expert in your particular field. And so with humility, with a measure of grace, be strong in defending it. Defend it with a measure of saying, I think I've done work which is substantial, and of course it doesn't answer every question, but what I have done is made a contribution. So those are just a few little tips. Obviously there are conventions around dress. When I was in Sweden recently, I attended a disputation where it was fairly low-key. In the Netherlands, and I know here in Germany, you often have to wear a full suit, a bow tie even, for your defense. In South Africa, we tend to be a little less formal. It is an examination of sorts rather than a public event. So students will often come, male students wearing sort of office wear, and female students the same. But dress accordingly, find out what some of the conventions are. By all means, ask your professor, your supervisor, your promoter for some advice. And if you can find out who your examiners are beforehand, in some contexts it's known, in others it's not, do your best to read a little bit of their work and think how your work may enter into conversation with theirs, so that you can make it a meaningful and worthwhile conversation with them, showing both appreciation for what you've done and an appreciation for their engagement with your work. So I want to wish you all of the best. If you're watching this video, preparing for your doctoral dissertation, go and read your thesis, read your dissertation again. If there are areas that you know that are perhaps not quite so strong, think about possible questions that could be asked from there. Even get one or two friends, one or two colleagues to read it and ask you some critical questions. Anything that you can do to prepare well will ultimately help you not only to be a better researcher, but also to represent your work in the very best light. So all of the best. Thanks for watching. I'm Dion Forster, and you can find out more about my work on my website, dionforster.com. I'll also put a link to my research profile. You can follow me on Twitter at DigitalDion, or on Instagram, or on YouTube, dionforster.com. Unfortunately, I've reached my Facebook friend limit, but I do have a public page. Just search for Dion A. Forster on Facebook, and I'd love to stay in contact with you there. If you have any questions, by all means pose them, and I'd love to see if I can answer them. So thanks for your patience. I'm going to head off. That is the Faculty of Theology, just behind me there. Head off to my little office and then to the library. So thanks for watching. So this, there you see the Berlin Tower. This is my regular ride to work, daily ride to work, here along the River Spree, and yeah, it is one of the most magnificent ways to get around. Here I am on Doris the Brompton. Today happens to be particularly freezing, -9 degrees, but any weather to cycle is good weather. How's this for a view? Going to the office. Absolutely fantastic. Dome, Museum Island. That there is the Faculty of Theology of the Humboldt University. You'll see I've made a little 360 video about that. Check that on my channel.